Good afternoon / morning / evening, depending on where you are on Earth. And welcome to Recruiting EQ, episode 55, Onboarding, Training, and Upskilling in 2025. Super excited about this one. Lots of juicy topics around this and how things have changed. Thank you guys for being here. Very happy to have, as usual, Jenny Finch joining us here.
Hello.
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 And our featured guest, Lee Andresi, is here as well.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. I'd love to go around the room and do a couple of intros. But before we do, I just want to say for anyone who's watching, give my little disclaimer here. For anyone who's watching this live, this is going out live to YouTube, X, and my God, I forgot LinkedIn, of course. So if you are on one of those platforms, we are not on that platform. So if you would like to comment, we usually get lots of participation. It's very much appreciated. Questions, anecdotes, issues that you have, disagreements, you can debate with us via the comments too. Please feel free to comment. We will see them. When there's a lull in the conversation, we'll happily read your comment. FYI, if the comment is lengthy, it's probably going to get cut off on this app that we're here. So I apologize in advance. We will not be naming you in the interest of privacy because this is being recorded and we don't want to get anyone in trouble. Maybe you're supposed to be working right now, so you don't want to get you in trouble. So we will not be naming you, but we really would love your participation. Disclaimer over. And now we can proceed to introductions. So shall we go around the room and say a bit about who we are and what we do? Who would like to go first?
I think Lee should go first today.
I agree.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny.
I agree, Jenny.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Rick and Jenny. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that you're doing inside the staffing industry, more importantly. So I've been in the industry for 40-some years. And I came in as a recruiter, worked my way up into several management positions and then executive positions. I'm a former high school teacher, so my whole goal from starting in this industry was to eventually teach, and that is what I have been doing for about the past 15 years of that 4-year career in the industry, and it's been many decades. So I've done every role from recruitment to sales management, leadership. And some of my biggest claims to fame are having the highest GP per FTE, which was $1,800, and landing a government contract within the intelligence community where the markups were, 165%. So all
that's
kinds
a lot of
of
opportunities.
So when you think like a consulting firm and behave like a staffing firm, combine the two, it's amazing what we can do.
That's awesome. I have questions on that too. But thank you for that. Jenny?
So I'm Jenny Finch. I'm one of the co-founders of Raymond George Consultancy. I'm based in the UK, and my career has started in the UK. Typically, we have the 360 model. So you deal with the candidates and the clients as well. So I've dealt with a number of different sectors, being a manager, being a director, so onboarded, trained my own staff in conjunction with some, also some sort of like structured training. Was a trainer at one point for perm consultants in recruitment, did a mobile role for that. And yeah, had a wide sort of like spectrum of different roles. And my sort of journey again, Lee, is kind of like, just sort of like around the 35-year mark in recruitment. So it's, I know, but I love it. So, if you love something, then why not continue to do it? So, and I think also, when you've had the luxury of being in recruitment for a period of time, you can see the impact on people that you help and support and you train and their journey. And that's beautiful. And particularly in my role now, I have some clients, and it's a full circle, that I hired as brand new rookies, trainee consultants years ago that are now and individually have set up their own business. And now they're some of my clients. So, in terms of onboarding, training, supporting, progression, that's fabulous in my book.
It is. And that's exactly why I got into teaching in the first place. You pass on what you have to get people better in better places than you are, So I think one of my greatest moments of appreciation is when one of my new hires who sat next to me on her first day in learning the ropes is now a CEO of her own corporation. I mean,
That's awesome.
it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah, that's beautiful to see. Well, and for those of you who don't know me already, I'm Rick Coluccio. I'm the VP of Business Development of Raymond George Consultancy, which is an international rec-to-rec firm and apparently podcast producing engine. So there you have it. Yeah, my background before that, on the teaching front, I used to teach music. I was and am a musician. I worked in the music business for years as a record label owner, an artist, a producer, and all this different stuff. And that was lots of fun, and the teaching was great for a while it lasted. Yeah, and now here we are in the recruiting world, and in Jenny's, in my world, the recruiting search for recruiters, the metaverse that is recruiting your own peers. Hot topic though. So this one came up, and Lee, you and I, and Julie, who unfortunately is not here today, but will certainly be on the next time we can get you on here, Lee. Hopefully, we were talking about this months ago. And Julie had suggested that we reach out to you very specifically because she thought you were like just perfect for this topic. But this topic comes up a lot with our clients in rec to rec, and it comes up for a number of reasons and in a number of ways. So hopefully this is part one of a multi-part series where we can tackle all those different avenues. But what has come up a lot is all of the change, right, that we've seen in staffing and recruiting when it comes to onboarding, training, particularly since COVID. Let's call that as sort of a line in the sand of a lot of the change that's happened. But, having to go virtually, everybody coming in virtually, the debates on, does virtual training work? Does virtual work? Is it for everyone? Lots of questions along that line. The going back to the office, lots of layoffs. There's, pardon me, dwindling numbers of very young people coming into the traditional job market. We're facing a lot of people getting to retirement age, so succession planning becomes a question. There's just a lot of moving parts right now when it comes to training onboarding. And I suppose the plan is in 60 minutes or less to solve all the world's problems. There you go.
Yeah.
No pressure, But no, so that's the impetus for this topic. And Lee, that's a million questions. But I think we agreed we would start from the onboarding piece today and have a chat about that. What's changed? What are the challenges that you see out there? How are you feeling about this entire topic right now?
I think it's a problem. I think it's a huge problem. And I'm working with a company called Allied Healthcare. And I've been contracting with them for about a year and a half, 2 years now. And I will tell you, just looking, and this is an amazing company on a mission to do amazing things, reducing poverty in California and getting people into jobs that they can have a living wage at, right, in the healthcare industry. And when we looked at the onboarding process, it's so lengthy. And it's tedious and it's a lot of mundane stuff. There's a lot of conversation with that new hire, prior to them actually starting the job, almost too much information, too many steps to complete. And it's not necessarily as personal as we might want to see it, right? So I think that there is an issue in the whole onboarding piece. And I agree with Jenny. We were talking in the green room beforehand. It's what do you do for them before they even start their job? Besides the paperwork, how are we handling that? And then once they get into the organization, onboarding, orientation, training, they're very different things. And I think that we need to start separating the stages. Look at it like a software development lifecycle. What is the journey that new hire has to go through, and map it out and think very specifically, what are the must-haves that need to get accomplished during each step and each part of that journey? Who's involved? What's the best way to get the information to them? And I think that if we start thinking about that onboarding from a user standpoint, from that new hire standpoint, we can change the game. And many companies, staffing industries have, right? They've done some great stuff in this area. I also think that we need to look at onboarding. And if we look at the orientation and the training, that training piece, we also need to take into consideration. There's one group, Rick, that you didn't mention, and that's the people who are losing their jobs, who have to get another job, and they're in that 50, 60-year age range, right? So
Totally.
they're not retiring. They can't retire for a lot of economic reasons. So now you've got veteran employees, right? Veteran talent out there who are having to learn a new organization, a new process, and they may have been at a company for 20, 30 years, right?
Sure.
Not a lot of them, but they're still having. So how do they think? We also have to get into the psychology of it, right? Of each of these groups of individuals. You know, how do they capture data? How do they process that data? How are they going to apply that data? So it gets very complex when you think that we've now got 5 generations working in the same space, and we can't treat, it's not a one solution for all necessarily, but we've got to find what that common thread is. What's the through line that's going to give people a great experience in that onboarding? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It does. It's complicated. Clearly, where to start?
You start with you start where you sit, right? You always start where you sit. You do research. Again, I always go back to, how do user researchers think? They always go into a situation and they say, all right, what's the current state? And they just peel back every possible thing that contributes to that current state. And then, for example, let's think about the HR stuff that's required for onboarding, right? All those documents that they need to sign, the training that they need to take for HR. Is all that stuff, are we getting them that information in a way that it's easy for the new hire to obtain that information? So for some users, text message, right? All day long. For other users, it might be email. For other users, it might be, you need to give me a call and walk me through exactly what I need to do.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to define who that audience is and build the programs accordingly. Now that's almost in a dream world. Some might say we can't customize it for everybody. Well, that's where you got to look at that through line. What is that one thread, that one common thread that's going to make life easier for all these people? And where does AI fit in, right? How much of this can we make easy? We were just having a conversation yesterday that, new hires, they don't want to talk to anybody. They don't want emails. They want, they want to apply to a job that's through AI, all of that pre-screening stuff. So I'm sorry, you're going to hear dogs in the background. Yeah.
The dogs don't love AI.
Yeah.
As soon as you change topic to AI,
they go nuts. So apologies about that.
That's fair. Did you train them for that, or did they just hate the end of humanity?
I trained them.
I personally think an onboarding is, for me, it kind of fits into a couple of camps. It's process of onboarding to get somebody ready to be paid, ready with all the documents, all their tax forms and things like that. But it's also, how does that person feel at the end of their first day? And that's the measure. So that's the starting point. And how do they feel at the end of their first week? And then at the end of the first month, at the end of the first 3 months, where are their feelings in terms of feeling part of the new business, feeling that no questions are silly questions. So there's onboarding for me is that the process, but it's also what happens on day one, what happens before somebody gets there. In the UK, I think that, the notice period plays a part in terms of what your future employer can do in that time frame. Where are the touch points? Understanding that actually, if somebody's accepted an offer and then they've got a 4 to 12-week notice period, that they then are either at their current company, their existing place, that are potentially having little sort of conversations like, do you really want to leave? We love you here. We can give you this and we can give you that. They're being perhaps pulled emotionally to having some touch points in that period, whether or not logistics and geography play a massive part in this, in terms of, can you physically go for a coffee with that person? Can they come in to meet the team at the first, end of month meeting? Can they come in for a team lunch? Or is it a virtual lunch where everyone sits down together and they get to know their colleagues before they even start? And then day one, that their desk is ready, that that they've got the right email address, that the IT systems. There's some very practical things, and certainly, in my experience in recruitment, the feeling of talking to somebody that's been placed after their first day, and they say, "Oh my goodness, they knew they were expecting me. They welcomed me. Everybody in the business knew about me. My desk had been wiped. It had been clean. I had the right laptop. I had the right phone. I had my email address. They gave me my logins to the CRM, and people were available to talk to me, and they had a plan." And that is absolutely, that person goes home at the end of the day and they're like, "Whoa, this is amazing. I love it." I feel that they've invested. So that it's not just actually what they said in the interview process, they're actually backing it up on that first day and that first week, so that that person understands that they've joined and made the right choice. Because I don't know what the statistic is, but I think in the first week of somebody joining a new business, if that part is diluted, hasn't been thought about, the feeling at the end of that first week, in terms of percentage of people thinking, have I made an error? Is this the right place for me? Are they what I saw in that shiny, new, brand new interview process? Or is the business actually what they said they are?
Yeah, agreed on everything. And that's why I really believe that if we look at the journey and the experience, all of that is taken into consideration, right? Every single step of it. And you're getting feedback, like you're alluding to, through every single step of it. So that's why I tend to lean towards new hire experience being onboarding, orientation, training, and then professional development. Professional development, training, you're learning how to do your job at that organization, which could mean several different things depending upon the experience level of the person that you're bringing into the organization, right? And then upskilling is what I would consider part of professional development based on where that person wants to go. But you're absolutely right, Jenny. So when we go into an organization and we don't have that buddy, or we don't have that, ability to meet people in human form, which I will tell you the biggest mistake I've ever made in my career is thinking that people who are new to the staffing industry can learn the job remotely. Not even close to true. I think that was the biggest mistake. It was cost cutting, say $400,000. In 1 year by canceling in-person training and making it all remote. That was huge during that economic time period. But does it make sense for the organization to do that with people who have just learned how to spell staffing? No. They need in-house hand-holding, coaching, on-the-spot training, support, encouragement, and all that stuff to make sure that they feel as though they're progressing, right?
And they also need to be able to listen to other people. They need to be listening to their colleagues. And I look back and I mean, I know the world has changed, and I don't want to be the person that keeps saying, well, in my day we did this and in my day we did that, because I know it's different. But for me, I think that my learning journey when I first went into recruitment, could I have learned at the same pace by working remotely? Absolutely not. Because what I didn't have is the opportunity for, the praise in public and kind of correct in private type of mentality, but also listening to other people being praised. That was a great call. Why was it a great call? Or if you're stuck on a call, I remember vividly, the amount of notes that, I used to do this. You'd write it down. You're like, and you write it down. So you're kind of coaching a little bit while they're on the phone as well. And you just don't get that. Now, I know that there will probably be people, successful individuals that have not had, the in-person experience, and that they've been super, super successful. But I would say that, you increase your chances probably tenfold by being surrounded in a team and hearing, listening, learning, taking feedback, being coached, being trained. And that gives you a fantastic foundation. And even when I work with businesses now where they are a hybrid model, and if they're hiring somebody without experience, I will always talk to the person without experience and say, yes, you can work from home 2 days a week, but do you know what? I wouldn't. I would be in that office. That's what I would be doing, because you're cutting down your time and your journey in learning by 40% by spending those 2 days at home.
Question for both of you on that topic then. So we're talking about how, if you're learning the ropes and you're learning recruitment, there's a lot of benefit to being in person. But what about the fully remote versus hybrid for, let's say, experienced individual contributors or team leads, managers? Because it's currently, and I just to contextualize the question, I feel like there's very passionate camps on different sides that are like, you know what? The way it works is you come in, you're in the office, and then when you achieve a certain level, then you get to be hybrid or then you get to be remote. So being out of the office is treated as a reward, which is a weird thing culturally. It's like the punishment then is to be in the office, which is a bit weird, in my opinion. But that's one way of looking at it. And others are like, no, if you're a manager, you have to be in office 5 days pretty much, even if your reps are start training remotely and then go hybrid, because you're managing, so you need to be the sort of rock. So there's a few different camps, right? And people seem very passionate, and there's a lot of, how do both of you feel about that relationship between your level and whether or not you need to physically be there or not to do your job or to learn your job?
I think that a business needs to understand what their model is. And if they are clear about they want people on site, that's okay. They don't hire people that don't want to be on site. It becomes really, really simple. If there are businesses that are happy to hire people that are remote working and do work from home, whether it's anything from 1 to fully remote, that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine too. But when you're hiring, if you're hiring a manager and that manager is managing remote recruiters, and they're a remote recruiter, then they'll kind of understand a little bit about the nuances of that as well. When Julie and I started the business, we were a remote first business, and Julie was based in Canada and I'm in the UK, so we couldn't really have that sort of hybrid sort of working or on site working, and I think, and that was before COVID. So that was sort of like 8.5 years ago. Obviously, COVID has presented opportunities in terms of the perception of being working remotely was that you'd be less productive, that you would be having different priorities when you're at home. And so I think the mindset of a manager can be, well, how can I see what that person's doing, rather than, managing for performance rather than coaching and upskilling. And obviously that's something that we're going to talk about later. So I think as long as a business is clear about what their model is and it isn't grey, then people are either going to be okay with that or they're not.
Lee, how do you feel about it?
So for new, I say that, if you're an experienced producer, you're an experienced professional in your domain, and what you need to learn when you get a new job, we're talking about onboarding, training, and all that other stuff. When you are new to a new organization, the learning curve is learning that organization, learning their speak, learning their tools, their processes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how that individual will likely learn best is to be on site for something like that, right? Getting to know people, getting to establish that rapport, those relationships, the trust, building that connection. I think it would be, good for them to be on site for a while. That means bringing in other people who might be typically off site. So in general, I don't have a feeling about this, but I do have business cases that I would say, if your business, like Aquent is one of those companies that has proven with empirical data that working remotely had absolutely no effect on their organization. Now, keep in mind, they've got long-term employees, tenured employees. How that works with new hires, or maybe their hiring, I agree with Jenny on this, that if your hiring strategy is to bring in people who are just learning how to spell staffing, then remote is not what I would suggest, right? So it's not a feeling at all. It's what does the business need to grow? And if that growth depends on people being side by side, and remember, there's another point to bring people in-house, is that when things go south, right? When things don't work well, you've got a team to help pick you up and keep you motivated. The way that you do that remotely is very different than what it would be internally. It's not to say that it can't be done remotely. It certainly can be. I've been working remote for almost 20 years now. And you get on a Zoom call, you pick up the phone, or you send each other a lunch gift card to someplace. There's ways to do things. But I agree with Jenny. It's what does the business need? What's going to work well for that practice of doing the work that they need to get done? Is it together or is it remote? But to use remote as a benefit, that doesn't feel good to me.
No,
and I
do wonder also that at the moment there are definitely different camps in terms of employers being able to hire entry-level graduates, people coming in, trainees into the business. And those businesses typically have a premises that when they hire people, that there is a geographical opportunity for people to go into work. Right. And therefore the training, the coaching, the development can happen. I would say, and I'll put my neck on the line a little bit here, and I'm sure I'm going to be countered somewhere along the line, but the businesses that are more comfortable with fully remote or a hybrid model tend to hire more experienced people. That's because that training piece has been done. So I think that there is probably a subconscious or unconscious recognition that if you are a hybrid, fully remote business, that there are going to be elements that you can train. So if someone's switching sector and they're an experienced recruiter, experienced 360, and they're moving from insurance to legal, they understand how to do recruitment. They understand that. What they don't know is the nuances in terms of the legal sector. And that's maybe that skill of learning that is quite different to learning how to do recruitment. How do you generate clients? And so it's a little bit different. So I think I think that there are places for each model, but where the businesses are not on site, I think that the opportunity to hire somebody with potential perhaps has to be considered more strongly.
Mm-hmm. And that's, again, you have to go back to what's the recruiting strategy? What does the business need? And then you create the recruitment strategy, then you create the onboarding, then you create the orientation, the training, blah, 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 blah. But there's so many nuances to creating these great experiences. And just having the three of us sit here talking about this should start getting people to think, have I forgotten about this, and this? Have I actually mapped this journey? Do I understand all the touch points? Do I understand how my audience likes to communicate? There's just no one perfect answer, but there is a common through line that if we don't think about how we are infusing our culture and infusing, our processes, our technology in as part of that culture to these new hires, we are going to lose credibility. So it starts from that recruiter, that first initial conversation with the recruiter, all the way through, their first 90 days when they really are getting their sea legs under them. And so what does that process look like? And how are we going to best get the information out there, make sure that they're understanding and applying what we're teaching them, and then taking it, to that next level of getting quantitative and qualitative feedback throughout that first 90-day period, which tends to be the most critical part.
I'm just going to take a moment to address the comments for a sec here, because I just don't want to lose too many of them. We had a howdy, folks. I'll name her. We had Julie say sorry that she can't be here, so that's fun. Hi, Julie. We'll name her. We're not going to get her in trouble, I hope. And then we had a comment here that I'll throw out there, but also maybe parlay into like a sub question. What makes a first day as a new team member exceptional? I'm thinking to give them a tour of the whole office, invite them for lunch with an assigned buddy coworker to speak to them about the expectations of the first week, mainly trainings and instructions. And like, what are your thoughts on that? And I guess I'll just couple that in, Lee in particular, but obviously Lee and Jenny. What are the sort of gaps that you're seeing? Like I clearly you're saying that it needs to be cohesive and thought out and whatever, but are you guys seeing particular gaps, even without naming companies, of course, but like where you're like, this is very missing, or this is trending downward?
I can give you firsthand. So if you don't have an agenda on day one for that person and all the people that they're going to be interacting with, that's a miss. They should have a learning agenda. And not only should they have a learning agenda of what that onboarding is going to look like for their first 90 days, that onboarding orientation training, they should also have goals. What are they supposed to be able to do within the first 30 days, the first 60 days, and then the first 90 days? If those two don't align, and that's how you back into an agenda. What do you expect them to do in the first 30, 60, 90? And that agenda should help them get to that point. It's got to be clearly laid out. Meetings on their calendars. People all know that they're going to be there. That first day when they walk in the door should be a celebration. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here. Like Jenny said, the desk should be set up. Lunch should be there. They should be meeting everybody that they possibly can, whether that's virtual or remote, depends on the organization. That first day should also be set up with meeting with, key people as high as we possibly can get them. Who is this person going to be interacting with? That first day should just be a handshake. And then throughout the rest of their onboarding period, they meet with these key individuals to get that relationship started, so that as they start working together, they're not unfamiliar. So all of that is built in there. They should have that desk set up. Their laptop should. Do you know that technology is the number one hiccup on onboarding that I've seen? Mm-hmm. Their laptop isn't working. Their software isn't connected. Whether it's Bullhorn or anything else, I can't get this. I can't get to that. Sometimes you could waste 2-3 days trying to get that fixed. There's no reason for that. Not to mention that as soon as they fire up that laptop, it should say, "Hello, Lee." Yeah. Right? Wouldn't that be nice if you saw a nice sign that says, "Hello, Lee, we're so glad you're here."
It's a bit like staying in the hotel room. Isn't it?
You know what, Jenny? You took the words right out of my head. I'm thinking of the most luxurious hotels and how you're greeted and walked. They should have the red carpet treatment. Red. It just should be a beautiful shade of red that they're walking on when they come in, because those employees have choices. Every candidate will have a choice of where they want to work. We need to show them that we're grateful that they chose us.
I have one client that deliberately starts people on a Tuesday. And the reason that they start people on a Tuesday for their first day is because when people come back on a Monday, after the weekend, often there's team meetings, there's things going on. It allows them to ensure that from that Friday to the Monday, when they start on a Tuesday, everything is ready and set to go. They have, they are they're not a large corporation, but they provide lunch on the first day for everybody. So everyone goes into the kitchen and they get lunch brought in. So they get the opportunity to mingle and meet people. They have a very, very structured process in terms of, the senior leaders of the business actually are available and they give their time for a couple of hours in terms of overviews. So they are made to feel special. And the week before, typically they go for a sort of like a team, sort of like drink, coffee, whatever, on the Friday, so that when they come in on the Tuesday, there's some familiar faces already in that business, because they've met them differently. I know from a personal viewpoint, there was I joined a business and the head office was in Scotland, and my very first day I was flown to Scotland because for a number of logistical reasons, we didn't have the office open in the area that I was working in. And I remember being taken for lunch with another new person that joined by the head of HR, the HR manager. And it just blew me away. It was like, oh my goodness, it made me feel really special. And it's not about the cost of the lunch, because you could go to a cafe. It's about their time, their investment, them getting to know you. And it's like, I've made the right decision. This is the right business for me to be in. And I remember, it's years ago now, but it's kind of been left with me that it's important. And I remember, speaking to friends and family at the end of the day going, oh, it's amazing. I went for lunch. I was taken for lunch. Goodness, that's fabulous.
Yeah. One of the things that I loved representing Aquent for 21 years. And one of the things I loved about it was that when we take a new hire and we bring them into HQ, and I'd say, I need you to know that your first paycheck is coming this week, the week that they started.
Right. That's huge. That's rare.
It's huge. I had one new hire start crying because she was economically challenged. And so not only did her technology work, was her desk set up, did the manager come out, did she see the CEO, did she see the president? She saw all these people, right? And then at the end of that day, I said, oh, by the way, you're going to be getting your paycheck this week and direct deposited. She goes, how did you do that? I said, I didn't do it. I said, we've got a great, finance team. We've got a phenomenal HR team. We all work together to help get this experience off for you. And so sold, right? And that person's still at that company.
That's awesome. But I will say, though, and this is, again, a question directed at both of you. Personally, having worked for some pretty big companies when I was young and trying to fund my record label, etc., the best onboarding experiences I had, the most impressive ones, were for the worst jobs. Meaning that the onboarding was extra nice, extra fancy, extra special, and there was all this pomp and circumstance, and the tech was there, and there was personalized things and swag with the, that was had my name on it and whatever. And then, oh, everybody grab a popcorn bucket. We're going to take you to the movies. And you go to the movies and it was a speech and whatever and all this great stuff. These are bigger companies, right? Which I won't name because I don't want this to be about slagging other companies. But the second the onboarding's done, it's you're sort of talked about how it's your break, you could take your break. Legally, you have to take your break. But just understand if that might lower your stats, which are affected to your bonus if you take your break, but your work's not done. This was like a benefits admin or a financial institution, right?
Jenny and I are tilting our heads.
This is a giant company. And I know a lot of people who've been in those bigger companies. These are not recruiting jobs, right? These were in either sales or tech sales or whatever. And so it's there is a cynicism from some people that taking you out for lunch or whatever, it's done in the service of then kind of delivering the bad news that it's now here's the reality of your job. You're going to have to work yourself ragged. And by the way, all those things we promised you are maybe going to happen, but you're going to have to go way above and beyond. So have you encountered this, and how do you feel about because the least onboarding jobs have for me personally been the best jobs, the ones where they just sort of plopped me there, but everyone was very genuine and nice and the job was great and I had a good time there. But so there is a weird disconnect where it's I think some people are cynical, and myself, I was as well, that it's okay, what's the catch? You guys are doing all this stuff, but every time this happens, I get totally disappointed with the reality of my job the second that the onboarding's over. Is that something that you guys see in staffing? Is that on your radar, or how do you feel about that whole scenario?
I have not personally encountered that. I'm shocked. I'm saddened to hear it. Not shocked, but I am saddened to hear that. So I think that, when there's that much of a disconnect, it's going to be a reputation within that organization, and they're going to have a very difficult time recruiting for that company because now we have things like Glassdoor. We've got, all kinds of ways for people to find out what a company is like once you lift up the curtains, right? Once you pull up, pull apart the curtains. But I would say that's a shame. That should not, there's no reason for that to happen. But it's interesting, Rick, that you say that your best job was where you had the least amount of engagement during orientation or onboarding. And so were you experienced in that job? Could you just,
no. not that experienced in the job, but it was when I came into staffing, honestly. But I did have, when I was very young, some terrible, like very minimal onboardings that were terrible jobs as well. Just that was when I was very young. But when I was working in radio, I had very little onboarding. It was just like sink or swim, here go. And I was not experienced, but I just happened to be good at production, and I happened to be decent on the air. So they just tried me out in a pinch. It was right place, right time.
So
and it was great.
Audition. So that's an audition. That's not onboarding.
That's rare. Exactly. There was no onboarding. It was just kind of like, yeah, they just threw me in. But in staffing, it was kind of the same thing. It was just sort of like, here you go. I mean, I wasn't a kid though. I was in my 30s and I had done sales before, but still it was like, here's the phone, make some calls in front of us and we'll talk about them. You know what I mean? So the onboarding, and I have clients that I supported here in Toronto. Maybe this is the toxicity of Toronto. Maybe this is Toronto and Montreal's problem. Maybe Canada's more toxic about this than we realize. But in Toronto, a lot of the clients that I even dealt with at that agency, they would talk, not a lot, but certainly some, the bigger ones, would say that their onboarding was a reflection of sort of an evaluation of the candidate. So in other words, if accessing the HR documents and reading them through and doing them had a few tech steps, those were there by design, it was explained to me sometimes, because they needed to sort of further assess that the person was a good fit, that they were going to do well in the computer training. So it wasn't about candidate experience, it was about candidate evaluation. And it was by design there to sort of weed out the people who were probably not going to make it from the beginning.
But isn't that the wrong time to evaluate a candidate in the onboarding process?
100%.
Because surely there are other things that you can do in the hiring process that can give you that information in terms of, coming back, meeting certain deadlines, filling out forms, etc. It doesn't need to be. I think once you've been offered and accepted and you are joining, if that then feels like you're going through the next level of, am I really right?
Yeah.
That's, I mean, there's words that I am struggling to find at the moment, but I'm finding that quite tricky. The only time that I joined a company a long time ago before I went into recruitment, and at the interview, you were told you had to pass their training. It was a really strong training process, and it was 2.5 weeks. And if you didn't pass their training, then you didn't get to become a sales rep in their business. So, they had a high percentage of people passing, and it was about learning and doing and stuff like that. But at that time, I don't think that I questioned it. In terms of, I was kind of backed myself a little bit. I did. It's like, well, it's going to be okay, and I'm going to be fine. So they maybe used that at that point, but nowadays I'd be quite horrified to hear that there is a deliberate intention to try and see somebody's behavior when they join. And that is still an it's almost like however long it is, a month's live interview. It's an ongoing interview, isn't it?
You're actually right.
3 months. 3 months. Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well, I'm going to go to the comments here, because people apparently are juicy about this here. They've got some things to say. So from a sales business development perspective, I feel like great sales managers incentivize salespeople based on what motivates them the most. And that could be the creativity and trust of working remotely. So I guess this was for earlier when we were talking about using remote as an incentive. I'm going to throw an example of something that I'm currently sort of hearing from people right now that we're trying to help them with as a rec to rec, not naming anybody again. But there are a few companies who've been doing that for a while, meaning after COVID, they made remote an incentive, right? So meaning if you were achieving goals, then you got to be remote 2 days and you got to be fully remote eventually. Some of those people who performed very well even moved away from town. Dun, dun, dun. Now they're going back into the office. And of course, now that the culture has changed and remote is no longer an incentive, it's not only being de-incentivized, some of those people are just straight up being given an ultimatum. We'll package you out if you don't come back to the office. Or whatever, but they were actually rewarded this. So they're like being punished for what was once a reward. So it's very mixed messages. This is the sort of chaos that we have now post-COVID, right? It's tough. It's a complicated market. But how do you guys feel about that? The sort of like shifting of, I mean, it goes back to what you both said initially, right? A company needs to know what they're about first and foremost. But since there's been so much change, these are big companies I'm talking about right now too, like not small agencies, right? So culturally, there's this weird thing where, yeah, your sales manager's saying this because it's one day the culture, and then they have to go to your top performers and say, sorry, we're letting you go because the culture is different now. And that is happening. How do you guys feel about this? Where this weirdness?
I think it does happen, Rick, and I think it is happening. And I think at any stage, a business can change their direction. And,
sure.
The business owner or the company can decide, actually, we're going to, for whatever reason, we want people to come back into the office. And, there's a multitude of reasons about that. I think it depends. If somebody was hired to have a fully remote role, and then they are changing that direction, for those individuals, I think it's quite tough. If they were hired and they produced and they kind of won the opportunity, or the incentive, were incentivized to go remote, then they've got to think, do I want to continue with this business, or do I want to join another firm that is remote first? And that's where it comes down to, isn't it? Are you a remote first firm, or are you a hybrid preferences office, if you can get into the office? But it does, and geography plays a part. If you're a remote first business and now you're being asked to come back into the office, then it's probably discounted because people can't get there. Where they live, that's going to play a massive part, isn't it? But it needs to be, I think there needs to be transparency from the business. I think where it goes wrong is that, it's okay for them, but it's not okay for you.
Yep.
And there's exceptions, and I know that there will always be exceptions. Yep. But if those exceptions are known and understood, then people either are okay with them or they're not okay with them. So yeah, it's a tough one. But there are, if a business has an office that they're paying for that office, and they have a location and they have the right amount of desks in there and they have all the right equipment in there, and they're paying for the telephones and the internet and the floor space, and they feel that they have diluted, the team, the collaboration, people learning, etc., and they want people to go back into the office, then individuals have a choice, don't they? Do they go back in, or do they look for something else? And I think that the risks are evaluated by the company that is making those changes. They will know that they are likely to lose people. And if they're okay with that, then, that's kind of down to them, isn't it, really?
Lee, how do you feel about it?
I have very strong feelings about this.
Do tell.
Very strong. So, first of all, when I think about what this country has gone through, what the world has gone through with COVID, and many of those businesses succeeded and did quite well with a remote workforce. If the businesses did well with a remote workforce, why would they want to bring people back? Is it because that they have real estate that they just have sitting there and they just want to fill it? And are they willing to risk losing top performers who can go anywhere, name their price? That's their risk. That's number one. Is it a real estate issue? Is it a performance management issue? Do managers not know how to manage remotely?
Mm-hmm. Is it a gap?
Yeah. Is it a feeling issue? Well, I just want everybody nearby. Okay, that's great. If that's what you want, that's great. Just make sure that you stay on that tune and don't oscillate back and forth, because people get confused. And then the other thing to think about is that if we don't think about what the business needs to succeed before making all these other decisions, we're making a huge mistake. There are very talented people out there who can work anywhere in the world and make major contributions to an organization. And they're adults, and they don't need to be, they don't need to be in-house to manage it. They can be in-house for certain projects and things. But we're seeing something here in the Maryland, DC, Virginia area, which I'm in Maryland. So we've got people that are being forced back into government offices, and there's no space for them, because for the past 10, 15 years, the government has been reducing carbon, trying to reduce carbon and reduce the office space that's needed. Mm-hmm. And so now they're bringing all these people back into these facilities. There's no place for them to sit.
Well,
There's
just
no
just
place for
to
them to plug in. That's one area. Now I want to make this last point.
no, please.
The genie has been let out of the bottle. There are some people who cannot work on site, but they are capable and they are competent. And this is what's called inclusion. All those people with talent and skill and drive and motivation who simply can't get into an office have been working since COVID and have been contributing to business outcomes.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you've got good managers, they know how to manage remotely, period, end of discussion. If you are a new hire, you need that one-on-one support, create a space for that type of new hire, onboarding, orientation, and training.
But if a business if they've changed the direction, so they've kind of over COVID were, forced their hand in some ways, and now they've changed the direction, they do want people back into the business. I think that's tough for the individual, like for sure, because if they were in the business before. So I think it's different camps, isn't it? Because if they were in the business and they were quite happy to commute and they were happy to be on site, but then things changed and they did work from home. I think what you're referencing, Lee, is absolutely spot on. There are people that, from an inclusion viewpoint, absolutely, COVID hasn't changed that necessarily, because that is how they have successfully worked for organizations. That's a very, I suppose that kind of, for me, feels in a different kind of category in some ways. But I think it's hard, and there are a lot of businesses that are asking people to come back into the office. Interestingly, I've been working with a few businesses recently where they are fully remote and done quite a lot of outreach for these particular roles, and there are now people that have been remote that actually now won't consider remote or fully remote because they know themselves well. And I know we're kind of getting off topic a little bit in terms of remote and work from home and everything. But I think that the perception, it's great for some people, like everything. It's not a blanket, it's right for everybody. And I think people who have experienced both now have a preference. And I mean, I was going to count up the amount of messages that I got, like, actually, I don't want to work fully remote. I want to have the opportunity to go into the office. That for me is important. So there are definitely, different categories of people that
there are, for sure. But I think, so just to throw some American stats out there to continue on this topic for a little bit, is that the US, apparently Ernst & Young did a study that said that in 2023, 35% of jobs in America were fully remote, right? Which was new, and that was huge. 35% were fully remote. And then by end of January 2024, it was down to 1%. And those numbers were pretty consistent across 2024. So that's a 33 to 34% difference. So we're not talking about just a few people. These are probably in the millions of people in the US, and in cultures where you were rewarded by going remote, some of those people did move away, right? So an example they gave was IBM, where managers moved away. I know we're talking staffing, but just to play devil's advocate, they'd moved away. And then basically the ultimatum was, well, you're doing fine and you're managing your team. That's not the question, but we've decided to stop remote work. So come back to the office 3 days a week, 3 to 5 days a week, or get another job, right?
Let me
In the thousands of people blanketly. So it's just interesting. And do you think, Lee, like you were saying before, that some of that is a gap in training or in upskilling people to deal with a remote environment? Is it an oversimplification? Because we don't really know how to deal with this. We're just going to make a simple decision and then lose our people. Like the system, the decision, the business decision is more important than the human beings working for the company, or is that an oversimplification?
Decision. Like Jenny said, it's a business decision. They have to make that decision as to how they need to run their business, and then the candidate needs to make a decision on how they want to work. Right.
But in a way, the decision here is to cut loose your top performers, though, right? Like that's the thing. Is you perform well and you go for it.
And in their minds, that's okay. They would rather have that person in-house versus, keep them remotely. So that's their choice. I'm going to tell you about a real life situation. I just had this happen last week. Someone was told to come back into the office, and they came back into the office. They said no remote work whatsoever. This was Yeah, no remote work whatsoever. So when their hiring manager asked them to do something after hours while they were home, what do you think that employee did?
I think they did it with a smile on their face,
No,
Lee.
not. They absolutely did not. You said I could not work from home.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'll need to address this when I go into the office tomorrow.
And I don't mean this to, I don't mean to, and I agree with you, but I don't mean to say one way or the other that when something is bad or not. It's just, it's a lot of mixed messages,
But that's
right?
what's happening.
Yeah.
This is an emotional, visceral feeling by people who are having their hand forced to go back into an office when they've been consistently having that ability to support their clients, their talent, their manager, etc. And now you're asking them to say, I want you in the office and I want you to work from home after hours to handle blah, 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 blah. That is a real thing that is happening. And so managers have to figure that out too, as does senior leadership, right?
And I know I'm conscious of time here. We're reaching the end of this, but we said we were gonna, and we'll maybe set up our next call. But that sort of like business decision making, which is like we would rather have someone else in house than the talent that we currently have. That's sort of like system first versus individual. You know what I mean? The business decision takes precedence over retaining our individual talent. Comes into a different light when we talk about a lot of jobs disappearing due to AI automating them as well.
Yeah.
Right. And so.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, how does that complicate things, do you think?
Go ahead, Jenny. Jenny, were you going to say something?
No.
Yeah, I keep going back to the same thing, Rick. We've got to be thoughtful about this from the top down. And if the top of the organization doesn't appreciate or doesn't know how to instill productivity, and if that's the culture that they want, let me just back up. If that's the culture that they want, then that's the culture they're going to get. And everything that comes with it. So they'll
get what they deserve. Pardon me. I'm just kidding.
I mean, and that's not to say that highly qualified people don't want to work in an office. I love working in an office.
Absolutely.
Right? I love working in an office. I love the people around me. I thrive off of their energy. And it doesn't have to be an either or. Can it be a what works well for the individual and what works well for the company and everybody achieves their goals? I think that's the nirvana that we need to get to,
Sure.
And I think when we go back to talking about what we were originally talking about, the onboarding, the training, there are so many tools and so many ways to engage with people. Even working in a large corporation, people are all over the place. So how do you engage people who are all over a large building or multiple campuses? It's no different than working with them remotely. And I'll give one more example about this remote and then I'll be done. I had clients working in the same building and they were supposed to be attending the same meeting. And where do you think that meeting was held? They're all in the same building. How do you think that meeting was conducted?
On Zoom.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the mixed messaging, right? And I think it is.
It's not mixed messaging. It's very clear. I want control. I want you in my office. I want you here when I want you here. So that tells me that's the culture. And then good employees are going to have options of whether or not to work in that type of a culture.
Touche. I will take a moment to read out the last couple of comments that came in. One of them was, when companies overhype the hiring process, it raises a red flag. I think we're talking about the Royal Hotel treatment. Is it really that great, or are they desperate? That's an interesting take. Are they desperate to have me? That's almost feeling like you're devaluing yourself a bit, commenter. That it's like, if they're being nice to me, they must be desperate, is maybe a little,
Yeah, I think Glassdoor is a beautiful thing for that. And I think that if candidates don't do reference checks on companies that they're looking to work within and people that they're looking to report to or work with, I think that's a mistake. You got to do your.
Lee messaged me about, I think that there is a computer situation. So
no.
that's.
she disappeared, like mic drop. Bam.
Oh,
We'll never
it's
know what
completely like,
we'll
yeah.
never know what her last words would have
Really,
been.
yeah, but it is the right time for us to go anyway, though, isn't it? So, yeah.
It is. Thank you very much. Thank you to Lee Andresi. We will have her back again for part 2 because there's so much
Yes.
here. There's so much here. So stay tuned for part 2. Jenny, thank you as always for being here and contributing such great stuff.
You're very welcome. No, I loved it. I think it's such an integral part of the hiring process, isn't it? And it's about retention and going back to the original thing is, how does someone feel? You know, do they feel when they come away from their first day, their first week, it's like amazing, or not? Or
and I agree with you, Jenny.
they've got some questions, yeah.
And I agree
But
with
no,
you.
thank you, Rick, as well.
Yeah, more important than ever, right? Is to think about how they feel with all these difficult complications.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yes,
Right.
thank you for being here. Join us all next week, everybody.
Thanks,
Wednesdays
Rick.
in ESG.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.